Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Marcus never imagined his mom's 68th birthday would end in absolute silence, with 20 people sitting around a fully set table, staring at their plates as if the food had turned to ash. But that's exactly what happened that sunny October Saturday in Phoenix, Arizona, when he decided to reveal the truth he'd uncovered just 3 hours earlier. 3 hours, that was all it took for 15 years of marriage to collapse completely, for trust to shatter into an illusion, and for Marcus to realize the woman sleeping beside him every night was a total stranger. The morning had started normally. Marcus woke up early, around 7, and went to the bakery to pick up the French bread his mom loved. Vanessa was still asleep, wrapped in the sheets, her blonde hair spread across the pillow. She'd come home the night before from yet another work trip, this time, Seattle. Or at least that's what she'd said. Marcus kissed her forehead before leaving, and she mumbled something unintelligible, still half asleep. The kids, 13-year-old Sophie and 10-year-old Brandon, were already awake when he got back, watching cartoons in the living room. It was an ordinary Saturday morning, routine, even, filled with the comforting rhythm Marcus had always valued. He worked as an operations manager at a medical equipment distributor, a stable job that paid the bills and allowed them to live comfortably in a 3-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood. Vanessa worked as a human resources consultant, and over the past 2 years, her business trips had become more frequent: Seattle, Denver, Chicago, sometimes twice a month. Marcus never questioned it. She was dedicated, professional, and he trusted her without hesitation. They arrived at Marcus's parents' house around noon. The house was just 20 minutes away, a single-story home with a spacious backyard where the family always gathered for celebrations. At least 15 people were already there when they pulled up: Marcus's siblings, their spouses, nieces and nephews, and Vanessa's parents, who lived in Tucson and had driven 3 hours to be there. Marcus's mom, Dorothy, greeted them with warm hugs, and soon everyone was spread out across the yard, chatting and laughing while Marcus's dad, Robert, fired up the grill. Vanessa was radiant, wearing a light floral dress, her hair pulled back in a relaxed bun. She chatted animatedly with Marcus's sister-in-law, Michelle, about a new Netflix series. Sophie and Brandon ran around the yard with their cousins. Everything seemed perfect. Normal. Until Marcus's phone buzzed in his pocket. It was 2:15 p.m. Marcus was helping his dad season the meat when he felt the vibration. He pulled out his phone absent-mindedly, expecting a work message or maybe a text from a cousin saying they were running late. But the number was unfamiliar. And it wasn't a text, it was a photo. Marcus opened the file and felt his heart stop for a full second. It was Vanessa. She was in the lobby of a luxurious hotel, crystal chandeliers, marble floors, hugging a man. Not a casual, polite, professional hug. An intimate one. His hand on her waist, their bodies pressed close, their faces far too near. And just below the photo was a short message: "Thought you should know. He's married too. My sister-in-law saw them together in Denver last month and took this picture. Sorry to do it this way, but you deserve the truth." Marcus stood frozen, staring at the screen as if it were an alien object. His dad said something about the meat being ready, but Marcus didn't hear him. He mumbled some excuse, something about needing to use the bathroom, and went inside. He locked himself in the hallway bathroom, the small one with the floral wallpaper his mom had never replaced, and sat on the closed toilet lid. His hands were shaking. He zoomed in on the photo. There was no doubt. It was Vanessa. The navy blue dress she'd worn on her Denver trip, the pearl necklace he'd given her for her birthday. And the man. Marcus didn't know him, but the intimacy between them was unmistakable. He looked again at the message: "He's married too." Who was he? How long had this been going on? Panic gave way to determination. Marcus wasn't the kind of man who waited or dwelled on doubts for weeks. If something was wrong, he needed to know, now. Immediately. He left the bathroom and walked out to the car, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. Vanessa had left her bag on the back seat, a brown leather bag he'd recognize anywhere. Inside, along with her wallet and makeup, was her laptop. She always took it on trips, saying she needed it for presentations and video calls. Marcus grabbed the laptop, closed the car door, and sat in the driver's seat with the windows up. The October heat made the interior stifling, but he barely noticed. His hands were still trembling as he opened the laptop. Marcus knew the password. It was Sophie's birthday, 110712. She'd never changed it. Maybe out of laziness, maybe because she never imagined he'd ever check. He logged into her email account. Gmail. Vanessa rarely checked email at home, always on her phone, always quickly. Marcus had never had reason to suspect anything, never invaded her privacy. Until now. He typed Denver into the search bar. Dozens of results appeared. He clicked on the most recent one, from 3 weeks ago. It was an exchange with an address, Greg Patterson @ Marcus opened it. And his world collapsed completely. Love, I can't wait to see you. The days without you are unbearable. Vanessa's reply, me too, Greg. Just a few more weeks and we'll sort everything out. I promise. Marcus felt bile rise in his throat. He scrolled further, each message another stab. There was an email from Greg dated July, when I see you smiling at me in that lobby, I forget everything. I forget I have a life I need to dismantle. You're worth every risk. And Vanessa had replied, you're worth it too, my love. Soon we'll finally be together for real. No lies, no hiding. I deserve to be happy. We both do. Marcus opened another, older one, from 4 months back. Greg had written, last night was incredible. You make me feel alive again. My wife never understood me the way you do. And Vanessa had replied, I know, darling. Marcus is a good man, but he's so boring. Predictable. With you, I feel free. I can't wait to start our life together. Marcus had to stop reading for a moment. Breathe. Boring. Predictable. He'd worked hard every day, taken care of his family, been faithful and present, and he was boring. He swallowed his anger and kept reading. There were messages detailing their meetings. The hotel in Seattle was perfect. Shame we only had one night. Another, I've already booked our reservation in Chicago for next month. 2 nights this time, we can have dinner at that Italian place you wanted. And more, I've been thinking about us living together. Maybe Seattle or Denver. A fresh start, far from everything. Once I get custody of Sophie and Brandon, we can finally be a real family. Marcus closed his eyes. She was planning to take his kids. Tear them away from him. Build a new life with a stranger while Marcus was left behind, alone, shattered. He spent the next 15 minutes reading compulsively. He discovered the affair had been going on for 6 months. They'd met every time Vanessa invented a work trip. Expenses had been charged to their joint credit card. Marcus never reviewed the detailed statements, trusting she only used it for work. He learned Greg was a businessman, married, with 2 teenage kids, and that he, too, lied to his wife about business trips. They were 2 liars building a house of cards, indifferent to the lives they were destroying in the process. Finally, Marcus closed the laptop. He put it back in Vanessa's bag and stepped out of the car. His legs felt weak, but he had to return to the backyard. He couldn't disappear for too long without raising suspicion. When he came back through the side gate, he tried to compose his face, but he knew he looked pale. Robert looked at him with concern. You okay, son? Marcus just nodded, unable to speak. He grabbed a beer from the cooler, more to have something in his hands than because he wanted to drink. Vanessa was now near the table, arranging the salads the aunts had brought. She was laughing at something Marcus's mom had said. How could she? How could she smile, chat, act like nothing was wrong? Marcus watched her from a distance, as if seeing her for the first time, or maybe the last. That woman laughing with his family, seeming so genuine, so affectionate, was a complete fraud. Every word from her mouth was potentially a lie. Every smile, a mask. Marcus felt anger rising, hot and suffocating, but also a pain so deep it felt physical. He looked at Sophie and Brandon running with their cousins. They had no idea. No one did. Everyone here thought Marcus and Vanessa were the stable, happy couple, the model of a lasting relationship. Robert called everyone to the table. It was time to sing "Happy Birthday" to Dorothy. 20 people gathered around the large rectangular table set under the jasmine-covered pergola. Marcus sat down, and Vanessa slid into the chair beside him. She lightly touched his hand and whispered, "Are you okay? You look pale." Marcus looked at her. Her worried blue eyes, her caring expression, lies. All lies. He didn't respond, just pulled his hand away. Vanessa looked confused but didn't press further. Dorothy sat at the head of the table, emotional, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. Robert began a heartfelt speech about 45 years with his wife, about the family they'd built together, about love that had withstood time. People laughed, some discreetly wiped away tears. It was a beautiful, familiar moment, full of love. And Marcus was about to destroy it all. But he had to do it. He couldn't carry that weight alone. He couldn't protect someone who didn't deserve protection. When Robert finished and everyone started tapping their forks against their glasses before singing "Happy Birthday," Marcus stood up. The noise stopped. Everyone looked at him, expecting a toast or an emotional speech. Vanessa frowned, confused. "Marcus," she whispered. He ignored her. He looked around the table at the familiar, beloved faces. His mom smiled, expectant. His dad raised an eyebrow, curious. Vanessa's parents, Gerald and Linda, seated across from him, seemed interested. And then Marcus spoke, his voice steadier than he thought possible. "Before we sing "Happy Birthday," I have something important to say." The silence grew heavier. Vanessa's eyes widened, confusion turning to something that looked like panic. She seemed to sense what was coming. Marcus continued, each word deliberate. "A little over an hour ago, I found out that Vanessa has been having an affair for the past 6 months." The shock was instant and visceral. Linda brought a hand to her mouth, eyes wide. Gerald froze, as if turned to stone. Dorothy let out a small whimper, her hand flying to her chest. Robert slowly closed his eyes, jaw clenched. Michelle began to cry silently. David, Marcus's brother, turned red with instant rage. And Vanessa. Vanessa went as white as paper, her hands gripping the edge of the table. "Marcus, what are you?" she started, but he cut her off, his voice still calm but laced with a pain that cut like glass. "With a man named Greg Patterson." She used her work trips to meet him. Seattle, Denver, Chicago, none of them were real. They weren't corporate trainings. They were hotel rendezvous. I read the emails. Hundreds of them. They were planning to file for divorce and move in together. "Take Sophie and Brandon away from me." She said I'm boring. Predictable. His voice cracked slightly on the last word, but he quickly regained composure. Vanessa stood up so fast her chair nearly toppled over. "You had no right to invade my privacy." Her voice came out shrill, desperate, but also furious. Marcus finally looked directly at her, and his gaze was pure ice. "Privacy? You want to talk about rights now, Vanessa? I had a right to know my wife was sleeping with another man. That she planned to take my kids away. That every trip, every corporate training, every goodbye hug and kiss was a lie. That everything in our life was a sham. The words came out sharp, like blades. Michelle, the sister-in-law, had tears streaming down her face. David stood up, his furious expression fixed on Vanessa. "How could you?" he said, his voice trembling with anger. Gerald, her father, looked like he'd aged 10 years in seconds. He stared at his daughter with a mix of disbelief and deep disappointment. "Vanessa," he began, but couldn't finish. "You're taking this out of context." Vanessa tried, but her voice faltered, desperate. "It's not what you think. Let me explain." But there was no explanation possible. Marcus pulled out his phone and opened the screenshots of the emails he'd saved in the car. He handed the phone to Gerald. "Read it yourself. Everyone can read it. Her words are all here. How I'm boring. How she can't wait to start her new life with him." Gerald took the phone with trembling hands and began to read. His expression shifted from disbelief to horror as his eyes moved over the messages. He passed the phone to Linda, who read it and started crying, not silently anymore, but in deep, painful sobs. "My daughter," she murmured through tears. "My daughter did this." Robert asked for the phone and read it too, his jaw growing tighter by the second. When he finished, he looked at Vanessa with an expression Marcus had never seen on his father's face, absolute contempt. Vanessa looked around at the shocked, disappointed faces of her family. Sophie was crying, clinging to an older cousin. Brandon looked confused and scared, holding his cousin's hand. No one spoke up for Vanessa. No one came to her defense. The condemning silence was deafening. And then she did the only thing she could do, she fled. She ran out the side of the house without looking back, grabbed her car keys from the bag on the back seat, and drove off, tires screeching on the pavement. The sound of the engine fading was the only noise for long seconds. The silence that remained was oppressive, heavy as lead. Sophie stood up and ran to Marcus, hugging him tightly, sobbing into his chest. "Dad," she murmured. Brandon came too, more hesitantly, and Marcus wrapped both children in his arms, finally letting his own tears fall. Dorothy cried softly, comforted by Robert. Michelle sobbed in David's arms. Linda was inconsolable, Gerald trying to calm her while looking shell-shocked himself. Marcus sat back down, his kids still clinging to him, suddenly exhausted, completely drained. David came over and put a hand on his brother's shoulder. "You did the right thing," he said quietly, his voice firm. "It wasn't easy, but it was right. She didn't deserve your protection." Linda, still crying, struggled to her feet and came over to Marcus. She knelt beside him and took his free hand. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "I had no idea. I can't believe my daughter." "I'm so sorry, Marcus. You've always been a wonderful son-in-law. You didn't deserve this." No one sang "Happy Birthday." The party ended right there. Dorothy said, through tears, that it was okay, the important thing now was Marcus and the kids. People began to leave slowly, murmuring condolences, hugging Marcus and the children. Sophie and Brandon were taken by David and Michelle to their house. It was better not to go home yet, not that night. Marcus stayed, helping his parents clean up, moving on autopilot. His hands worked, but his mind was numb. Robert didn't say much, but before Marcus left, he hugged him tightly and long. "You're stronger than you think, son," he whispered. "And we're here. Always." In the days that followed, reality unfolded with brutal clarity. Marcus hired a lawyer first thing Monday morning, an experienced divorce attorney recommended by David. Vanessa tried calling dozens of times, sent desperate messages begging to talk, saying she could explain, that she was sorry, that she loved Marcus. But there was nothing to explain. Marcus didn't answer any of her calls. He meticulously gathered all the evidence, the emails, the screenshots, the credit card statements he'd also investigated and found charged to romantic dinners and hotel stays, all paid with their joint card he'd never closely reviewed. The lawyer examined everything and gave a sad smile. With this, custody of the kids will be yours, no question. And the asset division will favor you too. Marcus filed for divorce citing infidelity and irreparable breach of marital trust. Vanessa tried to contest it, claimed Greg meant nothing, that it had been a mistake, a moment of weakness, that she loved Marcus and wanted to save their marriage. But it was too late. The words written in those emails were indestructible, undeniable. Sophie, after a few days processing everything with the help of a therapist Marcus immediately hired, said she wanted to stay with her dad. She lied to everyone, Dad, Sophie said, her eyes red from crying. How can I trust her again? Brandon, younger and still confused, also chose Marcus. Mom left, he simply said. You stayed. The judge, reviewing the irrefutable evidence and hearing the clearly expressed wishes of the children, Sophie already 13, old enough to have a say in the matter, granted primary custody to Marcus, with initially supervised visits for Vanessa until things stabilized. Vanessa was devastated, pleaded, cried in front of the judge, but there was no going back. The consequences of her choices were irreversible. The story spread quickly. Relatives told friends, co-workers. Phoenix wasn't a small town, but social circles overlapped. Vanessa became persona non grata in many circles. At work, once some colleagues found out, through inevitable gossip, hallway conversations, whispers by the coffee machine, she started being avoided. Clients asked for another consultant. Her reputation as a human resources consultant, someone who should understand ethics, professional relationships, and values, was completely tarnished. How could anyone trust her to resolve corporate conflicts when she destroyed her own family with lies? She ended up resigning 3 months later, unable to handle the judgmental stares and whispers that followed her down the hallways. And Greg? Marcus later learned, through the lawyer who investigated the case, that Greg's wife had been tipped off by the same person who'd sent Marcus the original photo. Apparently, that woman's sister-in-law had connections in Denver and recognized Greg and Vanessa together. She confronted her husband that same weekend. Greg, caught off guard and without time to invent a convincing story, confessed everything. His wife immediately filed for divorce without hesitation. Greg tried to continue the relationship with Vanessa for a while, tried to turn their secret romance into something real, but the passion that had seemed so intense and overwhelming in their emails quickly crumbled under the weight of reality. Without the thrill of secrecy, of the forbidden, of exciting escapes to luxury hotels, they realized they didn't have that much in common after all. The fantasy didn't survive the real world. 2 months after the confrontation at the party, Vanessa called Marcus, the only call he answered, only because she'd sent a message first saying it was about the kids. But it wasn't. She admitted, between uncontrollable sobs, that Greg had broken up with her. That he'd decided to try to win back his wife, take responsibility for his kids. That it had all been a terrible mistake. That she'd lost everything, her husband, her children, respect, her job, her dignity. That regret consumed her every day. Marcus listened in silence, and when she finished speaking, he said only 5 words, "I hope it was worth it." And hung up. There was no cruelty in those words, just a sad, final acknowledgement. Sophie and Brandon slowly adjusted to their new reality. There was a lot of therapy, difficult and painful conversations, nights when Sophie cried asking why her mom had done it, why they weren't enough, why she'd chosen a stranger over family. Marcus didn't have perfect answers, he could only offer constant presence, unwavering stability, unconditional love. Brandon suffered in a quieter way, becoming more clingy with his dad, as if afraid of losing him too. He started having nightmares, and Marcus spent nights awake, sitting by his son's bed, holding his hand until he fell back asleep. Visits with Vanessa were tense at first. She tried to win the kids back with expensive gifts and empty promises, but Sophie especially kept her emotional distance. She was polite but cold. Brandon was more receptive but also more cautious. The therapist explained that the kids needed time, that broken trust didn't rebuild overnight, if it ever fully did. Months passed, turning into seasons. Marcus immersed himself in work and his kids, building a new, stable routine. Family remained an incredible pillar of support. Dorothy called every day, always in the late afternoon, to check in. Robert came by on Saturdays to take the grandkids out for soccer or basketball, giving Marcus a few hours of breathing room. David and Michelle regularly invited them over for dinner, making sure Sophie and Brandon stayed close with their cousins. Even Vanessa's parents, Gerald and Linda, kept in touch with Marcus, repeatedly apologizing for their daughter's behavior and asking if they could see the grandkids occasionally. Marcus allowed it, generously. After all, they weren't to blame. In their own way, they were victims too. A year after that fateful Saturday, Marcus was sitting in the bleachers at Brandon's soccer game, Sophie beside him reading a book for school, when he realized something surprising: he'd gone an entire week without thinking about Vanessa. The pain was still there, probably always would be, to some degree, scars that would never fully fade, but it was no longer sharp, no longer paralyzing, no longer defining. He'd survived. More than that, he was rebuilding. Sophie had started smiling more, making plans for the future, talking about college. Brandon had made new friends on the team, and his grades had improved. They were a family, even if broken, even if different from what Marcus had always imagined, but they were a real family. Vanessa tried to rebuild too, in her own way. She got a new job at another company, a smaller, less prestigious role, but it was a fresh start. She began intensive therapy, trying to understand the choices she'd made, the impulses that led her to destroy everything. She sent handwritten letters to her kids, asking for forgiveness, trying to explain the unexplainable without making excuses. Sophie read them and kept them in a box under her bed but rarely replied. Brandon sometimes drew pictures, he'd always loved drawing, and asked Marcus to send them to his mom. The relationship remained distant, perhaps irreparably damaged at its core, but there were still small threads of connection, fragile as spiderwebs, but present. Marcus never regretted exposing the truth at that family lunch. Some people, well-meaning but mistaken, suggested maybe he should have handled it privately, spared the kids and family the brutal shock. But Marcus knew, deep in his soul, that he'd done the right thing. Vanessa had built an elaborate, cruel lie, wrapping everyone he loved in a grotesque charade. The truth, however painful and devastating, was liberating. The public revelation wasn't revenge, it was justice. It was the conscious refusal to carry the crushing weight of betrayal alone, to protect someone who hadn't earned that protection, who hadn't deserved that right. And in that deafening silence around the birthday table, when everyone stopped pretending and faced the raw, unvarnished truth, Marcus felt something unexpected amid the pain: relief. The truth was finally out in the open. And that, Marcus discovered in the months that followed, was the essential first step toward any real healing. It wasn't easy. It wasn't quick. It wasn't painless. But it was real, authentic, true. And in the end, Marcus realized as he watched Brandon score a goal and Sophie applaud absently without looking up from her book, the truth was the only thing that really mattered. It was the foundation on which everything else could, eventually, be rebuilt. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.